All right, so now it's been about 16 hours since we finished doing the last wash down on the floor. Where we are now is it's now Sunday morning, about 9 o'clock, and we are fixing to start putting down the first coat of primer. You can definitely tell where the transition is on the floor from where we first had started the project. You can tell right here along this line, you can see this part of the floor has not been done. This part of the floor has been done. So you can see that. That area right there is a shadow from the LED lights. But you can see the floor has more of a chalky type appearance now. And you can see, there's a couple areas where there was some oil. I cleaned that up as best I could. But now we have a nice clean surface that I'm going to actually sweep the floor down again. I can feel a little bit of grit still on the floor, so that's probably residual from where I was working on scrubbing it and everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sweep on that for a little bit first, then see what that looks like. We'll take a look at that, and then we're going to tape everything off that is going to stay where it's at. I'm not moving any of the equipment. And once I get it all taped off, I'm going to put down the primer coat. It's about 75 degrees this morning, pretty low humidity, so I feel like we got pretty good conditions. As long as I can get this coat down before it gets too warm today, we should be okay. We'll get this going, and I'll shoot a shot of it once we get it all taped up and start actually putting down the floor, putting down the primer. So even though I've washed this floor 4 times and allowed it to dry now for, like I said, about 16 hours or so, the floor has that real gritty kind of sandpapery feel that the instructions tell you that you should be seeing. But when I was checking that this morning, I could feel a little bit of dust and stuff on the floor, so I went ahead and swept over it, and as you can see, we ended up with just a little bit of residual grit, and this is more than likely just stuff that I've swept up because of the acid etch process. But again, we're sweeping, we're washing, we're sweeping, we're washing. So the key is that we're getting this floor as clean as possible. So I went ahead and laid a little square there. This is a 12-inch square, just so you can see the little bit that we've ended up with. And this is a 12-foot by 18-foot area that we're working on. But this little bit across the whole floor can impact what you're doing. So just when you get your floor prepped, you think you're ready to start putting down your primer coat, go ahead and sweep it one more time. It doesn't hurt to do that, and you're going to get a little bit of residual. So what we're going to do now is we're going to tape everything up, and then once we start putting down the primer coat, then I'll start shooting some of that. One of the things you want to make sure that you do is wherever you put the tape, make sure that you run down it and push it against so that it's touching, so that you won't end up with some gaps in there that can cause you some issues. Another thing you have a tendency to do when you're taping is allow your tape to ride up the wall and come off the floor, or come off whatever it is you're trimming out. So pay attention to that as well. Otherwise you'll end up having to trim and go back and recut in where your tape wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. Also, when you're pulling your tape, make sure that you don't put a lot of tension on it. You'll pull it and it'll put tension on it, but let the tension out of the tape before you stick it to the wall. That way the tension is not pulling against the tape itself, and it'll help it stick better. Okay, so now we've got some tape in around the feet of everything. We got it taped off along the wall. I made sure that I went in there and touched the tape so that it would be pressed against the wall, didn't tension it too tight. This should give me enough room to go ahead and start putting down the primer coat. So we'll start working on that now, and then we'll shoot some video of that. And then we'll have to wait 2 hours and let that dry. Once that dries in, then we'll be able to start putting down the epoxy. Now that we have the primer coat done, we're going to put down the lockdown primer. This floor in my shop, I'm hoping that I'll be able to cover 500 square feet with this. We'll see where it goes and try to get the most out of it. These are going to be the tools of choice today for this particular application. I'm going to use a disposable 3-inch brush, a roller that's on a telescoping pole so I can reach if I need to, and then I've got a liner inside my paint tray. Little note here, just if anybody would think about it, I'll stick a little piece of tape on there just to help keep that liner in the box. I'm going to start using the paintbrush first. I'm going to cut around all the feet and against the wall a good 3 or 4 inches. And this primer goes down a milky white color, and then it actually dries clear. So this way you can kind of see what you're doing. I'm going to go ahead and go around all the equipment and give me a good enough distance for the roller. But when I come back and start rolling, I'm going to start back in the back corner back here and work my way out and make sure I got good coverage. So one thing I noticed about this primer that I think is worth pointing out is the consistency of it feels a lot like a floor wax, like Mop and Glow or some kind of floor wax type deal that you'd put down on the floor. Goes on milky white, and then it starts to clear almost immediately. So it helps you kind of see where you're going. So what I'm going to start doing now is I've got my cut in done. That only took me about 10 minutes in this size area, even going around the equipment 10 or 15. So now I'm going to go with the roller and start rolling the primer down and work my way back out of the corner. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to saturate my roller. Make sure it's got a really good saturation on it. Try not to slosh too much here. I'm just working to get a really good coverage. Make sure that it's nice and wet wherever I'm working. Make sure that I cross over the areas where I actually had put the coat against the equipment. Try not to make it too thin, but I want to figure out what is going to give me enough application to get me to cover this area with a half a gallon. I'm going to try to put it on thick enough where I don't have to come back and do it again. A little tight area back here. That's one thing too, sometimes you have a tendency at areas where, hey, I'm not going to be up in there. Might not ever put a piece of equipment there, so I'm not really going to focus on that. But really, this is the time to really pay attention to what you're doing and do the best job you can even in those tight areas, because you never know how that's going to change in the future, and you don't want to be delaminating back there in that corner if you can help it at any point, just because it can make your whole project start having issues. Oh, yep. And like I said, it goes on, the instructions said, and I agree, it goes on a milky white color, and then it clears. Hopefully that's showing up. And again, trying to overlap where I cut it in to make sure. I also don't want to press it out so thin that it's not really getting good coverage. I want to give it a chance to soak into that concrete. Again, it feels a lot like a floor wax. It sort of even smells like a floor wax. Sure it's not, but my floor is not a really slick finish. You know, it was floated, but it wasn't heavily floated. And so this is covering pretty good. Shorten up my roller here. Trying to go over it really good, make sure that it gets in, soaks in. Again, trying not to get too saturated on my roller. Trying to work a pattern that gives me good coverage. I can go over it both directions. You got to be mindful of how you're doing this as well, because you don't want to paint yourself in a corner. All right, so we're going to continue on doing this until we get this coverage area like we want it. When we get through, we'll get in here and we'll show a video of that finished coating, see how it looks. Again, just working to make sure that we have really good coverage in those hard to reach areas. It's covering really well. I've got about a quart so far in here that it's taking up pretty good actually. Probably need to roll this out this way. because at the rate I'm going here, it's going to take my whole gallon just to do this area. And if that's the case, then that's just the way it's going to be, but trying to make sure to get plenty of coverage. All right, so we're going to continue on with that process and we'll see how much we use. All right, so we managed to get this coverage done on this floor. It did end up taking a whole gallon. I got to looking specifically at my coverage area, and I'm actually in an area 250 square feet. It's 20 by 15. Because I got more and more, obviously I had originally scoped 12 by 16, but as I cleaned and worked my way out, I ended up with a 20 foot by 15 foot area. So as you can see, we've got the milky white look on the floor at this point. We've got really good coverage on the primer. So it got down to the end, and what I was doing was putting a little bit in the bucket at a time, or a little bit in the paint tray at a time, just to make sure that if I had any remainder that I could use it or not use it, so I didn't want to waste it. So started out pretty thick back here on the back, and I was kind of worried that I was going to run out. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. So as I worked and readjusted what I was doing, I was able to get some more coverage and then come back in and overlay that a little bit. You can see here where I just finished this section. I've got that long reach boom on that roller, so I was kind of laying out what I had left onto this flooring. So you can see the coverage is good. It's soaking it up really good. It probably took me about an hour or so to apply this flooring, and the recommended dry time is about 2 to 4 hours. It says 2 hours on the front, of course, and on the back it says 2 to 4 hours depending on circumstance, I guess. But what I can tell you in my opinion at this point is that the coverage areas should be considered on the short side. So if it says it covers 250 to 500 square feet, depending on your conditions, of course, I would go ahead and calculate based on the 200, on the 250, because you don't want to run short, particularly on your projects, because I'm a half hour away from town, and you just don't want to run out of product on a Sunday. So as you work. So what we're going to do now is, it's still about 80 degrees outside. We'll probably peak out somewhere above 90 today, but for the cure time on this material, it should be cured out before we get above 90. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let this cure throughout the day, and then this evening, once the temperature drops back below 90, I'm going to come in this evening and start putting down the paint. So once we get that started, I'll film some of that, and then we will see what it looks like. As we put down the floor, we'll work our way across, back and forth across the back of the shop, working our way out so that we have plenty of room to apply all of our paint flakes as we go. So once we get started on that, we'll film that and we'll go from there.